Now, in your work, we had the question about dementia. Have you run into that where people are coming to you and saying, this is the crisis in our family?
Mhm.
What do we do? Will there be enough money?
It happens all too often, and unfortunately, in our world, for that individual with dementia, it's too late.
Right.
It's too late. That's more back to your world in terms of what can we do for them in terms of, moving money or making sure that one of the things we can do is kind of analyze things and maybe we can make their money last a little bit longer. But it really is too late.
Is genetics entering the life insurance evaluation process?
Not
yet.
In
a big way.
Not yet. But one thing that I do want to bring out and a point to make, and I think it's very important, we got a lot of great questions about, my brother and my mom. Well, what about you? What are you doing for yourself? Have you thought about this? What is your plan? Because all too often, when this event hits us, because I'm taking care of my brother or my mother or something, we tend to forget about ourselves. But remember who's up next, and that's typically your children, your spouse, or it could be your other sibling. And how is that going to impact them? What legacy do you want to leave for them? So it's important when you're doing all of this research and talking to all of these professionals, think about yourself and what your plan is.
Yeah. So I want to ask you a question. So when I go online and I get a long-term care policy quote, and I go on and I put in all my stuff, and it says, we'll email you a quote. Why is that? Because then I just like, oh, forget it. I'm not doing it.
Well, that's a great question, and I can tell you that's because long-term care insurance is so. It's not like buying. We all know we're going to die. Yeah. Okay. And we all have somewhat of an idea of how much life insurance we should, or we think we need, right? Obviously, if you have debt, that's pretty easy, right? If I've got $100,000 of debt, well, then I probably should have at least $100,000 worth of life insurance. And so that's a little bit, but with long-term care, as I said earlier, there's multiple options, right? No one size fits all. Everybody's situation is different. I mean, if I send you a quote, is it really going to fit you? Do you understand?
That's what I'm filling out the form,
right,
so that it does.
And the thing is, do you understand what that quote is? Do you understand the daily benefit amount? What the benefit triggers are? Durations? How long?
Yes,
how long,
I do.
All these. Well, yes, but most people don't, and that's why it's important to sit down with a professional and have these conversations. Because again, this is not. You don't want to get this one wrong, right? Because if you get this one wrong, it's not you that's impacted. Because no matter what happens to any of us in this room, we will be cared for. That is a given. We're not a society that doesn't care for it.
So help me. When I started doing this field, I was told, particularly New York Life, never raised its policy rates. Come on, the pool is great. And then all of a sudden there was that big shakeout. Mm-hmm. So I get a lot of people who are trepidatious because, I'm not falling for that. My mom did that. So has that shakeout occurred? And so now people are, in your opinion, more accurately pricing them so that the upside risk is small, or is it still kind of in a state of disorientation?
That is a great question. Some carriers, yes. Not all carriers.
Some actually got out of the business.
Yeah. What happened is we got this risk wrong. Think about it. This risk is only about 38 years old in terms of insuring this risk. So we haven't had a whole lot of data. Now we're getting this data. We've gone through 2008 where interest rates kill insurance companies, right? Lower interest rates just devastate insurance companies, all product lines. So all of the factors that cause these rate increases with your more physically responsible carriers, which we're finding most of your mutual carriers, they've built in all of these factors and kind of tested these. Am I going to sit here and say that something won't crop up in 10, 15 years that we're not aware of that could force rates? No, you can't. Nobody's ever going to sit there and guarantee rates. But remember something. Cost of care is not going down. right? The need is not going down. If anything, it's increasing. So the risk is increasing, the cost is increasing. It's only reasonable to think that,
So we have another question. Someone writes in, I have thought about myself, but I've been turned down for long-term care insurance because I have a pacemaker. What options do I have?
great question. Again, that's an individual circumstance. Now, pacemaker in and of itself would not necessarily be an uninsurable condition. So you might want to look at that again, but there are other options. Think about this. If you're uninsurable, truly uninsurable, there's a 70% probability for those of us who reach the age of 65, we're going to require care. It's actually 80% for females, 60% for males. So with those, and I'm a gambler, and those are really, really bad odds. So what that means, if you are truly uninsurable, you're at a higher risk of potentially needing care than just somebody who's, doesn't have a health issue that's rendering you uninsurable. So that means you have to plan, right? And in doing so, we want to make sure, part of what we do is we analyze your situation. And, oftentimes we find a lot of people have most of their money either in the market or in qualified funds, very, not necessarily high risk, but risk prone. Well, that's not going to work if this event occurs in 2008, right? So what we want to do is kind of shave off some of that, move it over into some more conservative vehicles. So we would analyze your situation and look at, again, shaving some of that off, because you're going to have to self-fund this. If you're uninsurable, you're going to have to self-fund this. So we want to make sure that the resources are there when the event occurs, especially if you have a spouse, because you don't want to impoverish the spouse, right? So we want to make sure that we're not worried about market timing. We're not worried about taxation. These are factors that we've got to think through. That's why planning is so important. And it's why, the younger you are, the more options we have. The older you are, unfortunately, they diminish greatly.
So actually, just following up on the question, you mentioned that, this person who asked the question said the pacemaker, they were told the pacemaker prevented them. Is this something that they should shop around to different carriers?
I would look into it again. Absolutely. Absolutely.
That it
If
may,
you have cancer, and is it a 5-year window, or is cancer a deal breaker as well?
That also is dependent. Typically, it's a 2-year. Sometimes it depends on what the cancer is. But we'll say, for example, breast cancer. We want to see the carriers typically want to see 2 years.
two years.
2 years recovery.
Okay.
2 years
That's it
recovery.
with prostate cancer too, right?
Yeah, prostate cancer as well.
So some of these things where people.
Now,
Yeah.
keep in mind too, and we're going to kind of get a little on the risk evaluation side of insurance, but we're looking at more mortality, not morbidity, right? And that means a higher probability of dying versus higher probability of needing care. Long-term care insurance is really scared of those with a higher probability of needing care than those with a higher probability of passing. So the higher the probability of passing is, the better the risk is from a long-term care perspective.
So when we're talking about cancer risk, you're talking about in terms of long-term care versus in terms of life insurance.
Right. We're looking at exactly. We're
It's
looking
almost
at
the
right. It's almost the opposite. We're looking at the morbidity factor of that cancer versus the mortality factor plays into it, because mortality is a good risk on long-term care.
Yeah.
Morbidity is a bad risk. So we look at the two and weigh the two.
So someone who may not qualify for life insurance could still qualify for
Absolutely.
long-term care insurance,
Absolutely.
and vice versa.
Correct. Exactly. And to that point, long-term care insurance and life insurance, those are options. And to your question about being uninsurable, there are other options, and that's why it's important to invoke the help of professionals in looking at this, and not waiting until it's too late, because you're not, ultimately we're not the ones who are going to suffer from this. It's going to be our families, and that's what this is about at the end of the day.
Here's another question. Help. Mom fell and broke her hip, and the doctor said she can't live alone anymore. I'm way too overwhelmed. What do I do?
Call us.
I think that this, it sounds like if she can't live alone, then she does need some kind of care. And whether, again, it goes back to figuring out, is that in the home or moving her? Since it sounds very imminent that this just happened and moving, doesn't happen right away, maybe looking into some care for her, at least to get her home safely. And if you're feeling overwhelmed because there are a lot of choices out there, there are also geriatric care managers available, which can kind of help with the big picture to be able to help focus you and give you recommendations and sort of take some of the legwork and the research and the navigating of the system off of your plate. So there are care managers out there that do this, and we all know some, we recommend them. But
yeah, I'd also add, building on what Deborah said earlier, a respite stay is a very nice transition between rehab after a broken hip and either going home alone or with care, or perhaps the respite stay goes so well that the person says, wow, this is nice having someone prepare my meals. It's great having just one floor, no stairs, someone doing house cleaning once a week. I think something to keep in mind, and this goes back to financial planning, is Medicare is insurance. Medicare does not cover assisted living, the custodial care, the quote unquote rent.
or home care.
Or
That's
home
a
care.
misunderstanding.
And Mass Health here in Massachusetts, Medicaid is Mass Health. Mass Health kicks in when someone has very little in terms of assets and funds. And again, legally, some funds can be protected, but there shouldn't be a misconception that, Medicare will cover it, or I can go into assisted living, they can't kick me out. Well, they can. They can. Some communities have arrangements that you make when you enter, but it's paying your monthly rent or paying into a community. If you run out of money, you then have different decisions to make. Skilled nursing facilities do accept Mass Health, but not all of them. So it is a very complicated, the question we were given, one step at a time. For the short term, having someone come into your home, or if you're able to afford a month at assisted living where someone can walk and recover. But again, that goes back to, do you have someone to advise you financially?
Right.
And so, all kidding aside, I would say call one of us. We all work together. We all kind of know what each other does, so that if you connect with one of us on the panel, we will all be happy to contribute. The Joe and Dorothy who came to a panel discussion, connected with Lisa. Lisa connected me to them. And as I said, every time their daughter comes into town, I meet with them. I don't bill. I just really want to help her orient and take care of these nice people who came to us, wanted some help, and it seems like the right thing to do. I would also like to call your attention to getting those documents I talked about for incapacity. So if your mom can't leave and she can't do her banking, you might need to step in and talk to her doctors, negotiate with the health insurance company, work on getting prescriptions. And so those documents that are fresh, not the ones that were done in 2006 that no one will honor, might be a good place to start, or finding a facility for respite care, or figuring out.
Deb, can you just hit on something that I think is an important point. Is there a point at which, because people often at different life cycle in their points in their lives will, do estate planning. We have our children, we're getting divorced. Is there a point at which the healthcare proxy that we did, when we had our first child, 30 years ago, is not worth the paper it's written on? I mean, is that something that we should be redoing on a regular basis, even if it's the same person we've authorized?